Five, four, three, two, one. Very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and attendees to today's GRESB event. I'm your host and moderator for the panel, Karthikeyan Jagajeevan, based in Singapore as the Regional Sales Manager for Asia, specifically focused on the infrastructure assessments here at GRESB. Now, joining us today is our GRESB infrastructure partner for Asia Pacific, Nippon Koei Business Partners, who will be speaking on driving demand, an integrated solution to boost transit-oriented development, also known as TOD, and real estate. Now, rather than hearing more from me, allow me to hand the baton over to Ms. Namita Dinesh from Nippon Koei Business Partners, who will be taking us through some of the most effective strategies in transit-oriented development. Namita, over to you.
Hi, Karthik, and thank you so much for that introduction. I want to extend special thanks to Wendy and Ralph for your invaluable contribution to this event. And I also have deep appreciation for all the participants who have joined here today. Your presence and your curiosity is definitely deeply valued. To kick things off, let's delve into the reason why we've all gathered here today, which is transit-oriented development. And I've prepared some visuals and key points to discuss and guide us through this. So just give me a moment while I set this up. Yep. Is it visible? Thank you. So transit-oriented development, explained in the most rudimentary form, would be a mixed-use community that is that encourages people to live near transit services, and it actually decreases their dependency on driving. It's actually physically manifested as high density around station areas, medium density around bus stations, and an extension of up to 2 kilometers of cycling and walking infrastructure. Although TOD was coined in early 1990s, the concept has prevailed for a very long time. Transport and the built environment are mutually dependent entities that have consistently pushed and pulled to create urban forms, similar to a chicken and egg situation. But the reason why I'm so passionate about this topic is because I'm a trained architect and an urban planner, and I have a keen interest in data-driven urban planning and demand-responsive transportation planning. Now, speaking of demand, I do fully understand that this could mean differently for different stakeholders. For an urban planner, it's usually efficient land use, maximizing accessibility, minimizing environmental impact. But for a real estate developer, it could be occupancy rate and premium pricing. With that pretext that it could mean different for different stakeholders, I would like to open today's discussion on on how can we drive the demand for transit-oriented development so that it's a win-win for all the stakeholders. Let me give you a bit about ID&E company. We are the largest and the #1 infrastructure and engineering company from Japan. We are listed in the Japan Stock Exchange and the Japan Prime Market. We were established right around the time after World War II in 1946. And we have over 75 years of experience in this industry. We operate in over 160 countries. We are engaged in projects from mobility to dams to hydropower, airports, etc. All infrastructure projects except oil and gas and aerospace. With over 85 subsidiaries, we have a vast network and a wealth of experience. I belong to NKBP, which is Nippon Koei Business Partners. Our subsidiary is represented by that yellow rectangle, and it's headquartered in Singapore. I would also like to highlight BDP, another subsidiary, which is the #1 architecture and urban design company from the UK. We partner horizontally within ID&E company to provide integrated solutions to our clients, and we ensure we can leverage our collective expertise for the best possible outcome. With the vast amount of physical infrastructure projects that we've handled, we believe an additional layer of digital infrastructure is required to provide a more seamless solution. Our strategy is to integrate both physical and digital infrastructure to enhance transit-oriented development. I would now love to show you a few use cases to explain this strategy. The Jakarta TOD project is a scoping study for the Kota station area, forming the MRT system. This project actually exemplifies the UK-Japan third country cooperation approach, where it's supported by the Clean Green Infrastructure Development Program. This emphasizes a collaborative approach between not just in terms of funding, but also by highlighting the need for a collaborative approach that is backed by data for pure transparency. The next project that I would like to highlight is the JLD Singapore project. Now, this is a massive development that's spanning over 410 hectares. The district, I think, is to generate over 100,000 new jobs and 20,000 new homes. And the JLD is to be developed as a major transportation hub that connects existing and future rails, together with a comprehensive intra and inter-district networks that will link the district to the surrounding estates and thereby the rest of Singapore. Now, LTA has recognized that we also need digital infrastructure for the seamless integration, and we are proud to be partnering with them. So Nudge is a tool we developed that we can easily integrate to the LTA app, which simply is another word that suggests nudging users to use more public transportation. This is done through proper ABT. ABT is account-based ticketing for multimodal journey, also personalized route planner, and point systems and reward systems. So basically, we gamified the transit system to ensure that demand is generated and it's more seamless for users. The other example that I would like to highlight is the demand responsive transit developed in collaboration with Prasarana in Kuala Lumpur. Just like Grab and Uber, which works on demand supply basis, what if your local transit authority or organization could also do that? So DRT, Demand Responsive Transportation System, is a solution that solves this perennial problem of public transportation and matching its supply and demand. The idea is to simply optimize the transport operations. Another example that I would like to highlight is the collaboration that we did with a public-private partnership consortium in Jakarta known as Jaklingo. So Jaklingo also has an app where the users can do single booking for multiple modes of transportation in a single ticket, right? Now, this integrates LRT, commuter lines, and even Grab bookings. In fact, it's heavily subsidized. Compared to booking individually, it's actually 1/3 the cost. Now, this is aimed at encouraging public transportation users by eliminating pain points in multimodal journey. Our data-driven recommendation stems from a detailed study of movement patterns, including how, when, and why people travel. We also do clustering analysis, behavior analysis to understand riders better. These insights will inform future policies that are upcoming, thereby enhancing the overall effectiveness of transit-oriented development. Another example that I would like to highlight is the project that we're doing in New York City. This is a very current going on problem, which is the health crisis. So what we've done is we've related the health outcome, which is the hospitalization based on diabetes, to access to amenities in a more quantitative manner. Although there are many frameworks that suggest that, okay, certain areas needs to be stationed within 800 meters, certain things needs to be stationed within 1,000 meters from the station. We wanted to have a quantitative approach to know why and how much these placements impact on health. This actually is done in two phases. The first one is a diagnostic phase. Over here, we study individual neighborhoods, understand how the health impacts based on various amenities, and we give them a score. This is benchmarked against US Green Building Council, International Well Building Institutes, and Fitwel. The second phase is the prescriptive phase, where urban designers and planners can actually recommend exact number of amenities that is required to actually suggest and say that your health can increase by 20%, 30%, 40% based on our results. So this is something that we're very excited to be scaling to multiple other cities. And finally, I want to talk about the Good City Framework. The Good City Framework is a framework that is developed in collaboration with BDP and Nippon Koi as one of our offerings. And our first pilot offering is hopefully going to be in Kuching, Malaysia, where they are hoping for a transit-oriented development. Now, this is the other previous projects that I've been talking about focuses on improving demand, but we have other partners coming in place. But this would be our integrated approach, right? We understand that TODs, something we understood was TODs do not need to resemble like that of Japan or London or New York City when you're trying to do the same for a secondary or tertiary city like Kuching. And one thing that we've realized was they wanted to prioritize sustainability over densification, which is very different from what other cities have been taking as an approach. So this was very important moment for us because as designers, it made us take a step back to streamline, rethink, and regenerate, and see how we can do a context specific solution by adapting to the unique needs of newer cities and newer cities, especially of Asia. So to summarize, outside of the physical infrastructure offerings that we do three kinds of digital infrastructure. The first one is when we collaborate with architects and urban designers. The second one is when we work with authorities, where we give them demand responsive transportation planning services. And then we cooperate and work with mobility as a service technology partners. And together, we are giving a single offering, which we call the Good City offering. Okay, so I think we've reached the end of our discussion. And my hope is to bring all these different elements together and we can offer this approach to multiple newer cities. I'm actually excited to hear from Ralph and Wendy on understanding what demand means to them and what success means to them so that we can have like a leveling ground on this discussion. Yeah, thank you so much, Karthik. Now I'll pass it back to you for your Q&A session.
Thank you, Namita. I think what's clear to me is that TOD is very nuanced from what you've shared. And of course, we've heard some of the most effective strategies for increasing demand in TOD through data-driven recommendations, design recommendations, DRT planning, demand responsive transit planning, multimodal transformation integration through mobility as a service. Now, which collectively, I believe, set the context for what I trust will be now a very holistic discussion in Asian cities. So without further ado, joining us today on the panel, we have esteemed speakers from across Southeast Asia to share insights on driving synergy between TOD and integrated solutions in urban development, such as through the use of data to drive more informed decisions and to enhance sustainability in infrastructure. But firstly, I'm happy to introduce Ms. Wendy Haryanto, Executive Director at Jakarta Property Institute. Now, JPI is a non-profit organization with a mission to make Jakarta a more livable city and to accelerate the growth of the property industry through research and collaboration among various stakeholders. And this is to solve pressing issues in urban development while ensuring sustainable growth. Wendy concurrently holds the appointment of studio leader at NUS Cities based in Singapore. I'm also very pleased to have with us Mr. Ralph Dixon, Executive Director of Sustainability at YTL Corporation Berhad, one of the largest companies listed on Bursa Malaysia and involved in various industries spanning construction, power, manufacturing, real estate, data centers, renewables, to name a few, and the list goes on. Now, Ralph is also CEO of YTL SV Carbon, the largest CDM consultancy in Malaysia that provides end-to-end solutions for projects under CDM. And with projects currently across Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and China. Last but not least, of course, you've already been introduced to Ms. Namita Dinesh, but allow me to further introduce herself. Now, she is the senior smart city designer at Nippon Koei Business Partners, Company Limited, based in Singapore, which is a group company of ID&E Holdings headquartered in Japan. Now, ID&E is involved in consulting, business management, energy, and urban and spatial development. Namita is personally involved in the Gaudi platform, an innovative data analytics and insight solution which empowers urban and transportation planners, policymakers, real estate and infrastructure developers, in addition to urban service providers, in order to help them make informed decisions. Now, speakers, thank you for joining us today. So let's kick things off. Wendy, tell us, given your experience across Singapore and Jakarta, in your words, what does transit-oriented development mean specifically for Asian cities?
Every country has their own definition of TODs because of their limitations and their capacity. But TODs, outside of technicalities, is actually a chance to revitalize and revamp the city. It presents a viable path towards creating more sustainable, livable, and economically vibrant urban environments. In the case of Jakarta, everybody knows in the world that it's notorious for its traffic congestion. Okay, you come to Jakarta, you have to sit in the car for a few hours to get to wherever you want to go, and long commute times as well. Now, TOD can significantly enhance mobility and accessibility by providing efficient, reliable public transport options.
Thank you, Wendy. And I think that there are vast potential applications for transit-oriented development across Southeast Asia. Now, specifically for Asian cities, I'd like to pose the next question to Namita. Now, given your experience in the Gaudi platform, right, what do you see as the potential applications of data into transit-oriented development for more livable metro cities?
Yeah, thank you for that, Karthik. Transit-oriented development is such a key word now, but it's actually a big collaboration between multiple partners, wherein you have public transport authorities, operators, municipalities, private sector developers, even technology partners today, all coming together in a public-private partnership model. But often what is missing is another P, which is the people. So when urban designers design streets for people, it is to enhance the city's inclusivity and city's user experience, right? And we think data can have a similar characteristic, or data can be used as a tool to actually enhance user experience of a city and of a new development that's coming up. So potentially we think we can do this through three things, which is prioritization, customization, and individualization. And this is to make the user or the population or the citizen of that city feel important, and their decisions to how to use the city is valued. We usually do that through three things, which is personalized journey recommendations. We also do it through, again, like how I mentioned, demand responsive routes and bus stops, demand responsive shuttles, things like that. And this is not an app based, this is something that you can on a WhatsApp ask for, right? Another one is data driven urban design. This is to make sure not too much oversupply of infrastructure is done. It is only expected, the supply is expected based on the demand. So this is something that we study through data driven urban design. So this is the three potential applications we use data for.
That's very interesting. And there are vast potential applications for data in any given industry. I'm curious to learn what you actually see as the current barriers to increased adoption of such TOD in Asia. I mean, just tapping into your current experience that Nippon Korea has had in the various projects that you consulted on. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. So when concepts are taken and then it's duplicated in another location, sometimes it doesn't work. Especially after COVID, the riderships have reduced massively because of a health scare. Also, commercial spaces associated with transit has also come down. Microeconomics, macroeconomics, all of this, like such as inflation and um, interest rate hikes, all of this has impacted that area, right? Now, I believe the major issue is not being context specific, because TOD is not one size fits all solution. A TOD in Tokyo will look very different from the TOD that I'm trying to do in Kuching, Sarawak, right? This can be because of the political structure, urban form, people, the citizen behavior, planning contexts. So it's very crucial to consider the local context and then develop based on those. Now, it's actually quite it's not a very new concept, right? Like in every architecture project, you have to be very context specific, but then it needs to be more detailed. Sometimes this is done using survey to understand people, but it's a very sample that you'll be able to capture. But by using data and by using people behavior patterns, which is collected through your phone and in an anonymized manner, we can actually capture and be more inclusive of all kinds of people on how they behave and how they use the city. The second one is the partnership models. Now, they're all different in different cities. Sometimes there are too many contracts, too many goals, and then they end up where no one is a winner out of this, right? So this becomes like a public good where you can't have much profit. So then your interest as private developers is lost eventually. So that becomes like a big problem. Another important barrier, I think, is to understand that TOD is a long game. So you are hoping to expect ROI in 20, 30 years, not at a span of 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, right? So, for example, in Singapore, although TOD was coined in 1990s, we've been trying to do this since the 70s, right? And although it was not successful, eventually now it's considered as one of the best practice for the rest of the world to look at it. So it is with years of growth and years of facing that we can get to this point. So expectations need to be managed in terms of time frames. Yeah. So I think these are three main barriers, Karthik.
Thank you. Thank you. Ralph, over to you. I've got one specific question for you. Now, with TOD, what is not often discussed is the vast potential for curbing greenhouse gas emissions through, well, a very directed approach on development, including real estate and infrastructure. I mean, that's what encapsulates TOD. Now, does the highest propensity to decarbonize lie only within the public transportation infrastructure of TOD? Or do you see that there are other parts of the value chain which can actively contribute to rapid decarbonization?
Right. Thanks so much. I think what I've done is prepared a couple of slides to show you. I like the term Namita used, which is long game. And, this is all relevant to the issue of, build it and they will come. And Kuching is a great example because Kuching is kind of, I hate to say, this in it's not a derogatory way, but, it's quite a sleepy place, but actually it's quite vibrant in many ways as well. And I spent a lot of time there in the last year or two and looking at the Kutz project, the hydrogen-powered tram project, which will run on the road. So they're kind of halfway between a Putrajaya or, new Indonesian capital, which is a purpose-built TOD type development space. And also halfway between that and also the, established cities like Manila, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, where you have to impose these transportation systems on top of the existing infrastructure and the existing networks, which is very difficult. So you can see here, you've got roughly 17% of emissions globally coming from transportation, but of course, some of that comes from aviation and shipping. When it comes to road transportation, a lot of that is heavy goods vehicles. So in terms of, connectivity into the cities, the emissions from road transport or other transportation sectors may not be that high. And you can see on the left-hand side, those are the sort of greenhouse gases that are used to measure carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas inventory for a particular space or a particular activity. or for a particular company or organization. What I think is less talked about and equally important. So emissions are an important and critical aspect. But I think what is also important, if I can go down one page, which doesn't seem to be working, is the pollutants that are often not talked about enough. And this, I think, is a critical part of TOD, is, not just talking about carbon dioxide equivalent, but talking about, vehicles on the road that produce tire dust and brake dust. And as you can see on the right-hand side, you've got these very, very fine particulate matter. And all of this, of course, goes into the water sources, it goes into the air, it goes into possibly even to the food chain. So really an unspoken or unthought of part of the pollutant environment, but a very important one in terms of livable cities. What I think is important also to consider is the stickiness. When you have these pollutants like airborne greenhouse gases, as well as the particulate matter, you look in the 1900s, you had horse-drawn carriages on the left-hand side, and you can see circled in red is one automobile, one car, maybe powered by peanut diesel. And less than 15 years later, you can't even spot a horse-drawn carriage in the city of New York. So an amazing transformation. The problem with fossil fuels is that they've become so sticky. Shipping industry, I know we're not talking about shipping industry with regards to TOD, but equally agile. From 1880 to 1910, you went from the sail, you went straight to the steam schooner, and that was in a very, very short space of time, historically speaking. So we know these transitions can happen very fast, but you look at the petrochemical industry, the fossil fuel industry, the stickiness of that, it's going to create a lot of inability to transition from fossil fuels and start to reduce those CO2e type of greenhouse gases, as well as the particulate matter. I think that's a huge challenge. The other one, and I'm nearly done, is electric vehicles. I have to be quite honest, I'm not convinced. I think they're a transition technology. I think we've got to rapidly escalate towards the last mile vehicles, electric vehicles for very, very last mile uses. But when you're talking about coming into the cities, connectivity from the main hubs, you have to talk about fuel cells and hydrogen. Otherwise, I think we're going to miss a lot of the very easy wins in terms of eliminating all these. And I think later on, we're going to talk about the ESG and other metrics that relate to what constitutes, green living, what constitutes sustainable living in cities. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rolf. That has been very insightful. Thank you. Wendy, over to you. Now, and this is specifically with regards to Jakarta, but feel free to talk about any other city you have experience from. Now, market research has shown that tenants in mixed communities are willing to pay a premium in rental. And this was also highlighted by Namita earlier in the presentation for better interconnectivity. Now, in Asia, do you see that there is a current mismatch between supply and demand for TOD? And maybe there's a follow-up question to that as well, which I'll ask, but how best can we then incentivize both developers to invest further into TOD? Thanks.
Well, there is evidently a lot of mismatch on what is being developed and what is actually required to survive in a city like Jakarta. Now, when it comes to Jakarta's condition, Jakarta actually demands for some extreme action for it to be enabled to be a sustainable economy. You're looking at increase of public transport, you're looking at preferences of mixed-use developments, and also the growing urban population is not helping much on this part of the world. Talk about demand. Now we look at the supply factor. The supply, what we're having is that Namita went through quite a extent on explaining what TOD actually means. Now, what is being developed in Jakarta is quite insufficient in all aspects. So the interconnections of it, the entire development, the infrastructure surrounding it. limitations on regulatory and land use also, and also most of all is on the funding issues. So all this are compounded together, creating a lot of mismatch. Now, you mentioned earlier you wanted to know about what incentives or what sort of solutions that can come up with all this mismatch. We can talk the whole 9 yards about it. It's actually quite comprehensive and there's a long white paper that we try to do about it. The mismatch actually resulted in an incomplete integration. So we have the product. You can see the stations. You can see what we call a TOD in this part of the world, but it's not really a TOD because it's not integrating anything. It's just a station of an MRT, comes out from the middle of the street, doesn't integrate with any of the developments surrounding it. It lacks also on affordable housing because the moment a TOD or a station MRT line is announced, the area around it increase in land value, meaning the opportunity on developing affordable housing decreases. Now, what are the incentives that the government has done? We actually had the opportunity in being involved in the revision of town planning just about 15 months ago. We worked for about 8 months with the Agency of Town Planning of City of Jakarta. And we came out with a few incentives for developers to want to build within the TOD area, putting aside all the other issues of integrations and infrastructure. One of the things was actually increasing the plot ratio for residentials. So if you own a piece of land within the TOD area, I think we put a radius of 800 meters from the station. If you have a land to build residential over there, you immediately get a plot ratio of 11. Now, plot ratio of 11 is very high. Most cities will probably be sustainable at about 8 or 9. But 11 is something, is a number that's thrown on the table for developers to be incentivized to want to build residential in this place. And why is it 11? Why is it not 7? Because they want affordable housing. Now, a lot of other regulatories needs to follow up with that. So it's not just throwing a number on the table for people to jump in and build. We're still pushing that papers and public policy to be approved. But as of now, a lot of developers are actually doing design and calculations on whether or not it's possible to build affordable housing for the middle class. So we're not talking about lower class, we're talking about the middle class, whether or not it's possible for us to bring back the people to the city. Okay. If you look at a city like Singapore, for an example, their incentive is quite simple. It's on taxation. When they open in gentrified areas like Punggol, the taxation rebate, should I say, deduction, falls into place right away. It's something that is in a support system for them to incentivize people to want to move and relocate their businesses. And then the HDB comes along, the infrastructure comes along, and everything else comes along. But bottom line, they give the incentives through taxes, whether it's property tax, business taxes, or anything. It becomes very affordable for people to relocate to a different side of town and create a new township.
No, thank you. I mean, as a resident for the past decade in Punggol, I can absolutely
Oh, you live in
agree.
Punggol. Okay.
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay.
And I'm actually very excited about the Punggol Digital District that's coming up as well. And you're right.
Oh, it's wonderful. That one is
It is.
wonderful. I love it. Yeah.
But I guess again, we could talk at length about what that means as somewhat of a blueprint for other Asian cities to follow as well. But I think this leads on very nicely to the next question that I have in store. And it's going to be an open question to everyone on the panel as well. So feel free to chip in. Now that we've identified what might incentivize real estate developers to further invest into TOD, and of course some of the barriers as well, what then do you think would be for the lack of a better term, some solutions that can help to narrow this supply and demand mismatch? Wendy, since we have you speaking last, maybe we'll get you to speak first and then we can transition over to Ralph and Namita. But for Ralph, I have a specific question for you, and I'll talk a bit about that on the most material and ESG aspects. But Wendy, just some thoughts.
Amita came out with this new P in PPP. So it's 4 Ps now. So it's the people. At the end of the day, you need to address what is needed, what the local people are actually requesting. And we need to be able to address that in order to be able to perform and create a better livable cities. Now, whether or not we like it, MRT Jakarta has only 2 lines, one in plan, one is already developed. We have no other choice but to expand the public transport. Now, expanding that and creating better regulations to create better housing for people to come back to the city. The PPPP also needs to be strengthened in the regulatories, and also the financing aspect of it needs to be in place. At the moment, the financing does not address any special conditions if you were to build in TODs or if you were to build sustainable buildings. It's a totally different thing. So no incentives on that part. So at the moment, the government and the public sector are working kind of on a different direction. So our role at the moment is to put them together and try to create the same target in the near future.
That's very interesting. So there is still somewhat of a mismatch, and this is where we do see lenders or finances coming to step in to clearly identify, that mismatch and obviously try to alleviate or narrow that gap. It's a very interesting point that
Yes.
you brought across. Now, maybe on the engineering and architectural side of things, Namita, what are your thoughts? Are there any design solutions that can help to narrow the supply and demand mismatch?
Okay. Design solutions. The short answer is you need to phase this out. There is a need to understand that, okay, there's going to be some supply and there's going to be some demand, followed by more supply, and see if that's actually getting used or not. Instead of just going with investing hugely on so much infrastructure that is now not a connecting system, but a barrier to the city. Wherein, because of a new metro line, I can't even cross the street. This was supposed to solve a problem, but because of its construction and everything, now it's become more hard.
Mhm.
So, from a design perspective, we are doing a few of this in UK. It's called the meanwhile use. So usually property prices skyrocket the minute there is a announcement of a new line coming up, and now the premiums get locked in. Now, once the construction begins, it starts falling because now the actual issues of construction, noise, congestion around that area comes in. Now, this is a very short-term micro trend. We know that eventually it's going to go up. But because of that, while that area is getting developed, we can actually come up with more temporary solutions to be used there. Now we call it the black box, which is like a big hawker center made out of most locally available materials where people actually congregate together, right? Now the reason why we do that is one, financial benefits while this trend is going on, and two, it helps in branding benefits. So you're already branding this new location, let's call it B, C, something like that. And then we're trying to brand this C as a new hub for community and everything. So we are doing this much before then the actual transit comes. So this is something called the meanwhile uses that BDP and Nipponko is doing in multiple places, and we've been pushing towards. So now this is like a temporary solution to a massive problem. We do recognize that. So there is this need to slow down a bit, understand the data, see what the people want, and then provide it, and not just jump charges. More philosophical in perspective of really do understand what people want before you provide it. Yeah.
It's I think what you've encapsulated very nicely summarizes the challenges between developing on a brownfield site versus having full autonomy to really develop at a design perspective on a greenfield site. But thank you for sharing your thoughts as well. Um, Rolf, I mean, imagine this, right? We have a perfect utopia, transit-oriented development is taken off, everything is goes by the book. It has been developed as designed. Therein lies an issue about understanding the performance, or whether it really is a livable metro city. And I think the best way to really benchmark or to assess that performance is to understand what you deem, okay, in your experience, what you deem would be the most important or material ESG aspects. And if you could talk a bit more about some of the specific indicators or specific KPIs or sustainability performance targets that can showcase the ESG performance of such livable cities, I think that would be something I'd be keen to hear more on. Any thoughts? Well,
Yeah, sure. There's a number of very important KPIs surrounding the way water, energy, and other resources are used. So those renewable resources, the way they're used in a city, and of course, those are all clearly measured both in SAS as well as GRI. And adopted by a number of stock exchanges as well, key indicators to be reported on, including SGX and Bursa Malaysia. So definitely you've got the emissions, you've got the waste, the water, the energy use. Of course, if there's any way to measure the emissions up to scope 3, full scope 3 emissions, even better. But I realize that a lot of companies aren't fully equipped to go down to scope 3, 15 categories at this point in time, but definitely as far as you can go in terms of those indicators. The other ones, which I alluded to earlier, are probably equally important in terms of quality of living and the appeal of TOD, which is really health and safety. So health surrounding, the built environment, transportation, the air, the water, all the other aspects of impacting our health. And of course, safety, a key impact, like Mazda, you've got in the Middle East, where they put all the vehicles underground. The main level is basically pedestrian and electric vehicles. So there's a degree of autonomous vehicles roaming around, but a degree of safety that you don't necessarily have in another type of city where you have everybody living on the same level at street level. But definitely health and safety, those indicators, and those can be broken down further into different metrics. Of course, the other one is extremely important, and that again goes back to equal access to jobs, equal access to education, and what we call DEI, or now some people say DEIJ. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, including justice, or B, which stands for belonging, but equally, has the same connotations as justice. So these indicators are very important in terms of measuring the effectiveness of a city to deliver all those quality aspects to the residents and the visitors to that environment. So I think I'll stop there because those are really the ones that I see as being critical. And waste, water, energy, those should really fit under the emissions category, and all the others go into the community category.
thank you, Ralph. Now, I think this leads on very nicely to some of the questions that we received as part of the webinar. Now, while I have everyone on the line, I'd like to invite all the attendees or participants. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the panel or to me, please feel free to put those questions into the chat box. Ralph, now you spoke about DEI and pollutants and health and safety specifically. What I want, we had a question from the audience, and the question is, how can waste and pollution be better managed in TOD compared to municipal waste management in Asia? Or do you feel that the actions to better manage both waste and pollution, it doesn't vary between TOD or generally how we do it right now? What are your thoughts? And Namita, over to you as well, if you'd like to share some thoughts. But Ralph, what do you think?
Yeah, it does seem we're finding it very hard to move away from the municipal solid waste management model where all the waste is aggregated, even if you separate at source, in terms of household or business or even in the shopping malls and hotels, it sort of ends up together. And you see the aggregation of waste. I mean, you see the way Singapore treats the waste very effectively and landfills the ash. In Malaysia, it's still very much geared towards landfill, but increasingly looking towards incinerator models and recycling models. So, again, it's very hard to impose an effective waste management system on a city that is already quite established, and much easier for, say, the new Indonesian capital or for Putrajaya or another new development to actually put those systems in place. I don't know if Wendy has any views on that for the Indonesian capital, but we haven't really seen it happening effectively around Asia. So we've just gone back to the MSW, incineration or landfill. It doesn't really vary from that very much. So disappointing, but there are high costs, and the more you put up the tipping fee, the higher the chance that the items will be illegally, disposed of. So you can't just say we're going to put up the tipping fee to $60-$100 a ton, and then suddenly you get this transition where people say, right, I'm going to be more sustainably minded or responsibly minded. It just doesn't work that way. So we think we have to recognize those things in designing. Thanks.
Thank you. Namita, Wendy, any thoughts?
Wendy, you want to go first, or I
Oh,
can?
all right. Thanks, Ralph. I think Indonesia's new capital has not looked into waste management at this point in time. So, I mean, just to address that, I mean, Jakarta has a serious waste management issue. We are actually paying our suburban city to create an area whereby we dump trash in that place. So we don't do incinerations because we don't have the source for energy to supply to. There is other aspects of politics going around that. What we're trying to do right now is basically learn from Singapore. Going back to Singapore again, there is that landfill island out in Pulau Semakau, whereby every ashes from the incineration, I believe 90%, you manage to reduce the size of the trash to 10%, whereby the 90% becomes ashes and it's being put to that island. We're trying to learn that. I'm hoping, Ralph, that our new capital will look into something like that as well. But they do have other issues that they need to address at the moment before that waste management.
Thank you, Wendy.
To you, Namita.
Thank you, Wendy. I think both of you just, I think it's essentially the last thing thought of, although it's one of the most important things. It's just not in the top priority of things when you plan. And then we try to have these very rudimentary solutions plugged in that sometimes don't work. So this is why Singapore is considered as an ideal situation because of long-term planning of how, when, and how it's designed and how many and for how many. So the scenario and projection planning is very important. So from an urban planner, I think my answer is going to be based on projections and scenario planning so that immediately it is included in the resource allocations while planning for this. So yeah, it's a lack of long-term thinking.
Very interesting. It's to me, it just sounds like a challenge that there isn't really a clear solution to as well. And waste is an issue, especially with rapid urbanization. I mean, Southeast Asia has the highest rates of urbanization forecasted for the next 20 years as well. And it's something I think severely we'll need to focus on, at least try to alleviate before we can really move forward in adding prime real estate value that encapsulates or encompasses transit-oriented development. Now, and I think this nicely links up to the next question, and I've jumbled the order a bit so that it's a bit more seamless. Now, Wendy, you spoke about how best to incentivize real estate developers would be to the form of the right type of financing at the right stage, to put that simply. In your words, and again, open to everyone else on the panel, are you able to share some success cases? Doesn't have to be in Jakarta, but um, anywhere in Asia would be ideal. Success cases of green or sustainability linked loans that were issued specifically for transit-oriented development, or if they were equally granted to assist with transit-oriented development in subsequent stages or phases.
In the case of Singapore and Hong Kong, it's automatic. So the moment an integration is done to a TOD, let's say the station of MRT or public transport itself, then you get automatically, I believe, in about 5 to 10% of your gross GFA. So that one, without being asked, without having to ask or propose or doing any paperwork, the number is increased by that much immediately. So if you are a sustainable building to a certain grade, there is actually monetary reward, I believe, from BCAA in Singapore. Now, in the case of Jakarta, it's actually, we're working towards that. But at the moment, because green financing is not in place, there is no incentive for you to be green in Jakarta. So the incentive is more towards cutting back your operational costs. So if you ask on some developers in Jakarta on whether or not their buildings are green, they will say yes, but they are not certificated. So they do the green aspects through cutting back the operational costs. They do the energy savings, they do the gray water harvesting for their own benefit, not for the certifications. Okay, because there is no incentive for them to request a certification. Now we're trying to match that. At the moment, again, as in public and private, they're going different directions. So how to put that together? So the target is actually, it's a consensus target rather than making it purely a bottom line driven type of project for the developers. So you see how things are being done in Jakarta is totally different as to how things are done in Singapore, where everything is top down. Here, the developers are doing things on a survivability type of mode that benefits them. So.
It's interesting you mentioned that point, because then it also comes to a situation where it ends up being difficult to try to communicate how the actions that they've taken, right? Even though there's no need to do that. So I guess a good way to actually showcase that, and yes, excuse me, I'm branding GRESB for a little bit, but doing an ESG assessment for like GRESB that focuses exclusively on real estate and infrastructure, I think might be a good fit for them as well. So if anyone wants to hear more about GRESB, feel free to drop us a note. But let's go on to the next question though. But unless Ralph, Namita, anything you'd like to add on that? Otherwise, I think we've only got time for one last question. Oh, good. Okay. So the next question, I think it's a bit sensitive because that involves disclosing the name of investors as well. But what you can share, and it's going to be an open question to everyone on the panel. Who are some of the very open investors involved in transit-oriented development, specifically in Asia? If you can cite some examples from Japan, Malaysia, India, or Indonesia specifically, I think that would be answering the question that was posed by the audience. Thank you.
In the case of Jakarta, JICA is very much involved. So is the Japanese. That's direct investments. In terms of learning capacity, it's from Hong Kong and from Singapore. So they do it both ways. And I do believe JICA had arranged that it was a road trip basically for investments. Roadshow, sorry, for investments to Japan. So they did go and with the help of JICA to meet up a whole lot of investors, potential in Jakarta's MRT.
Thank you, Wendy. And Rolf, YTL is a big corporation, is also involved in the construction sector. Um, has there been any visibility or any transparency centering on what kind of projects or what kind of development actually attracts foreign investors? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we built the KL Express, which connects the international airport in KL to the city center, about 60 kilometers. We built that, and then we own about 30% of it, but we operate and maintain it. Um, so, we clearly saw that as being, critical in terms of connecting and allowing, more seamless access from the airport to the city, bypassing those sometimes horrendous jams. Not as bad as Jakarta, I admit, but KL can also be quite congested. But we're more keen again on the high speed rail connecting Singapore to KL and then to Bangkok as well. And I didn't mean to sort of have these slides. I just had them here because they were part of my presentation. But if you look around the region or around the world, you can actually see some of the developments where you've seen not investors, but developers of these projects. You've got this one here. There's quite a number. The Delhi Metro in India, the Colombia, Bursa Light Rail in Turkey, Peru even, you have the light rail. These are all funded by carbon credits. So the investors are indirectly buyers of the carbon credits of these projects. Of course, here, what I'm putting here is the Sarawak Metro, which effectively could be a carbon credit project for the Quds project. And of course, the Singapore KL high-speed rail. So it gives you some idea that investment doesn't have to be by the property developers themselves, but these can be the integrated infrastructure companies, like YTL. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say that, you look at London and Paris and you see great parallels there between KL and Singapore. Property values go up simply because you've created that TOD aspect. It's not full. It's not in terms of its full form, but it's certainly building towards the concept of TOD in those cities with the Channel, railway, just like we could have the, Singapore KL high-speed rail. Anyway, I'll stop there because I know we're short of time. Thanks.
Thank you. Very insightful. And yes, you're right. We are running out of time. I will be able to take at least one other question from the audience. Again, please feel free to post that into the chat box, and we'll be able to address those. But just to gradually summarize the discussion, I think the key takeaway is there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to transit-oriented development. It ends up being very nuanced. It ends up being um, a decision that involves various stakeholders, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to also increase prime real estate value without foregoing the basic amenities and the necessities of the local populace. Now, there's also an increase in mixed use developments as well. And that's something worth considering. I think that might be the norm moving forward, mixed use. And of course, there are a lot of key key drivers. But what's I feel is also lacking at this stage is how do we effectively brand or market such a TOD or such a livable city so that it serves someone as a blueprint to not specifically wash, rinse, and repeat, but at least as a guidance for other comparable cities to follow through as well, given the size, given the constraints that they may have. What was not often discussed, and I'm glad we brought this up, is effective waste management. As rapid urbanization increases, we do have to manage our waste more effectively. And that also means being more innovative in how best we divert waste from the landfills and increase recycling rates as much as possible. But Ralph, you brought up an important point. You increase the tipping fee, you're not going to end up seeing a change in personalities about increasing the adoption of recycling within the household as well. It's something that we actively need to promote, I feel, not just locally, but also collectively as a country to move things forward. Now, I don't see any last questions, and we are up to the hour at the moment. So Without further ado, I'd really like to thank each and every one of you, Ralph, Wendy, Namita, for a very insightful discussion on driving demand in transit-oriented development in Asian cities. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with any of our speakers today, please feel free to drop us a note directly. We'll share the details and including the recording as well in the email to all attendees. So without further ado, we thank you once again for joining us today, that too on a Friday. I wish you a very pleasant weekend, and we'll speak soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.